Faith TV, advancing kingdom lifestyle.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the GG Report. I'm your host, Godfrey Gichuki. This is an amazing conversation. Once again, I think I repeat myself all the time that this is another amazing conversation. Indeed, I am very, very happy to have you tuned in. As always, I always remind you to share the links. We are live on Elevate TV Kenya Facebook page and YouTube channel. So if you're watching us through those channels, please remember to share right now wherever you are and welcome your friends to the show. Please let them know we are live. As usual, we are so excited for another wonderful evening discussion on this amazing show. And I have a wonderful guest with me on the show all the way from the United States of America, a good man, a churchman, an academic man. He is coming from the Bible school, theology, and everything else. We'll tell you more about that. My friend, newfound friend, Robert or Bob Orr, born in Ireland, Scotland, and you spend most of your life in the U.S., so you share Europe and the U.S. You are a true man of the West, right?
That's correct.
Welcome to the show. This camera is your camera. Please look at it and welcome our viewers and tell them you're here.
Well, I'm so glad to be in Kenya. This is my 8th trip here. I love the country. I love the people of the country. And I love the churches of Kenya. And I have visited many, many of them. And I'm honored to be here again, and particularly with you, Godfrey, on this special show that you have.
Wow, wonderful. So I am very, very happy. I met, I just got to know about Bob's presence in Nairobi. I saw he's involved in a conference here in Nairobi with Apostle Isaac Mwangi, and I told Apostle Isaac, I want that man on my show because I think he's amazing, and we're going to be hearing many things. But today we're going to focus on a very particular area where my guest has specialized. He's done a lot of work in the area of church growth, and so we're going to be looking at church growth, purpose, plan, and strategy. As a matter of fact, as you know very well, every pastor who starts a church has a dream of growing that church. I think we all know that. Now, how you go about that depends on the vision you have, that is the purpose, the plan, and the strategy. Some pastors, of course, get to benefit from being part of a large growing denomination. So you start a church, you put the board, the notice on the road, and people know, oh, this is part of the Deliverance Church. This is part of Redeemed Gospel Church, and I belong to that kind of denomination. So they come in. So it might be a little bit easier for some churches when you start in a new area, if your denomination is already known. But for small independent startups, it's a completely different ball game, and some people struggle to find success in pastoral ministry. And I met people who tried to start a church. They were so frustrated, they failed, they were so offended, they were so hurt, and some of them have not recovered. But yes, here is a man with us on the show who has written a lot of materials on church growth, and I'm going to be asking him to share with us the strategies and his experience in starting and running churches. He has also trained many people in seminary schools. So welcome. This is going to be a very, very important conversation. And as always, the GG Report is a platform for big, bold, honest conversation, like I always say, on a broad range of subject matter: social, cultural, philosophical, political, legal, and theological. And today I have a true theologian man here. And before I allow him to tell us his story, I'm going to give you a snippet, a summary of my guest journey, very, very briefly. My guest is Professor Robert Orr. He is an ordained minister, theologian, and author. And Dr. Orr served as the president of the California State Christian University from 2012, and I think you've just retired. You will tell us how that was. And previous to that, he has served in so many other roles. Actually, Bob has actually 2 PhDs and a 3rd honorary in Doctor of Divinity. So, professor and teacher, leader. He has students who look up to him. He has written very many books and articles and journals and materials. So we're going to dig into that. I'll try and ask you as many smart questions as I can, man of God. But most importantly, I love you're a pastor. You know, you're a pastor. So that's the bottom line. Being a pastor, that's a great journey. So welcome to the show, and let's begin this conversation. Every time I have a guest, I always ask them to do a very simple thing for me, to tell us about their career and how they got to where they are today. As briefly as you can, but you're also allowed to be extravagant with that story. So, yes.
Well, the best way I can tell my story is I grew up born in Scotland, and my family immigrated to Canada. Mm-hmm. We were a poor family. We hardly had any money or anything else. But as a 6-year-old child, I caught polio and was paralyzed on my whole left side for a period of over 6 months.
Okay.
I was in a ward with 300 other children in iron lungs, all paralyzed and hit by that big polio epidemic. Mm-hmm. And all I could remember at that point was my parents teaching me and learning in Sunday school when I was just below that age. I remember saying, if you make a promise to God, God is willing to make you live up to it, but if you make a promise or a request to God, make that request in faith, asking God to do it. Mm-hmm. So as a young 6-year-old child,
yes,
I prayed and I said, God, if you will get me out of this ward, and I had already seen many of my people in the ward die. Mm-hmm. I said, Lord, if you'll get me out of this ward, I'll serve you forever.
Wonderful.
And the Lord got me out of that polio ward, and believe it or not, to this day, I'm still the only one of those 300 that were in that ward that walks. Mm-hmm. God used that experience to mold my life, and by the time I was 17 or 18 years old, I had started in university, and I went to the Urbana Missionary Conference and heard a great missionary by the name of Bull. And I listened to him speak, and there was something that God was stirring in my heart. Mm-hmm. And that began me on a journey that led me to, first of all, plant a church in my 19th year down in Georgia.
Okay.
It led me to start going to theological education and getting my original Bachelor of Education and then my master's degree. And I ended up pastoring a German Baptist church in a community that was quickly becoming Portuguese, and the church was trying to become English in that thing. So I was thrown in right into the middle of how do you become a missionary? What I did is I started to do some things that I thought would be kind of fun. I thought, Jesus said, people out in the community are like sheep without a shepherd. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, there's all these unsaved people in my community. I wonder if they're sheep without a shepherd. Mm-hmm. So I started knocking on doors, mm-hmm. and I asked a simple question. Hey, I'm a pastor in this community. Do you attend any church? They'd say no. I would say, Could it ever occur to you that you might need in your life, if someone was sick or you had a funeral or a wedding or whatever else the issue was, that you might need a pastor? If they said yes, I said, well, I'm available.
All right.
Well, over the course of canvassing that whole community, I had about 150 unsaved people in my community that I was their pastor.
Okay.
I started partnering with our church and saying, is there things we could do to bridge? And so it started off at Christmas that we decided we'd hold a Christmas banquet, and we started bringing these people in. And as a result of that, the church began to grow and it got noticed. So my denominational executive ended up having a conference in Banff, Alberta, Canada, and he said, would you do one of the workshops?
Okay.
And I went out there, but the main speakers were Dr. Donald McGavran, the founder of the Modern Missionary Movement, and Dr. Win Arn, the founder of the American Institute for Church Growth. I ended up doing my workshop, but found these two men because this was just at the beginning of the church growth movement.
Okay.
This is 1974.
Wow.
And they came into my workshop, and they came up to me after the workshop, and Donald McGavran said to Win Arn, you need to go and visit his church. Well, Win came up and visited our church. The strategy that I had developed ended up as an article in Church Growth America magazine.
Okay. Okay.
The end product of that is they invited me down to Pasadena, and at that time I began to meet people like Peter Wagner and Arthur Glasser and Ted Engstrom from World Vision, and I'm Bob Schuler, Youngie Cho. I'm meeting all these people, and here I am, just a 20-something-year-old pastor.
Right.
And all of a sudden, I'm cast into this environment. And Win said to me, he said, I think you do a good job leading seminars for us, teaching churches how to grow.
Okay.
So that's where it all started, back in 1974. I stayed in Canada till 1982, formed the Institute for Canadian Church Growth, and continued to travel about 20 weeks a year down to the States. In 1983, I moved to Pasadena, California, became the vice president of the Institute for American Church Growth.
Okay.
As a result of that, I became the vice president responsible for seminars and all of our international development. So this work has taken me to 59 countries now.
Wonderful.
And with the privilege of training pretty close to 500,000 pastors worldwide.
Wow. Wow.
God has allowed me to do a number of research projects which have been fairly groundbreaking. I actually wrote the first article that discovered that churches go through a life cycle.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
And that was written back in 1974. And it was called, Is Your Church in a Midlife Crisis? A few years later, when I was doing my PhD, I had an experience and ended up doing a study of how values impact churches.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
And the study that I did ended up winning first place for religious research in America. And as I was talking to my brother the other day, it says, it's amazing what God does with two poor country boys sitting in Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Right.
And all of a sudden, God has taken us all over the world to proclaim the good news of the gospel. So I became, at that point, one of the early pioneers in the church growth movement.
Okay.
And so have seen it develop, have seen its pitfalls, I've seen its good points, and I think it boils down to one major factor. We do not determine what the mission of our church is. Jesus did.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
He's the one that said, of all the things you can do in the world that are good, go and make disciples of all nations. And part of your introduction, I would say the reason most churches don't succeed is they don't understand clearly the mandate that Christ has given and the urgency with which he gave it.
Wonderful. Wonderful. That's a very, very good summary and introduction to a conversation you're going to enjoy here. And please make sure you stay tuned in. Like I said, share with your friends, share with everyone out there, and let's get this conversation going. We are talking about church growth, the purpose, the strategy, the plan and the strategy. And I think you have already had a very, very wonderful, outline of, the journey, how you go to where you are. And because I really don't want to necessarily follow a very strict script in this particular conversation. So I think I will just keep on following some of the things you have raised. One of the things you've said is, first of all, you started knocking doors, and you introduced yourself as a pastor in a community, and basically on the basis of that very simple, I remember the statement, I think it's in Matthew, where Jesus is telling his disciples that, Jesus had all these people who are following him, and they had, at one point he fed them, and they really got very excited, and they are following him. And Jesus said that, the harvest ready, the laborers are few. And then he also said that, Israel is like sheep without a shepherd. And here he had come, to be the Messiah, the shepherd, the real chief shepherd, to minister to Israel. And on that basis, you began exploring. If you're in a community, you have to start from accepting deep in your heart that you're called to be a shepherd. And that opened the door, and you began to see people come. So I think, and then plus, of course, you mentioned about the cycles. So maybe one of the things I would like you to first of all speak to when you started knocking doors and introducing yourself, maybe the culture is an issue. Over time, I'm sure is there a different strategy? Most of the people say we'll start church, they go and rent out a place and call their friends. They have this major fast service, and then after that, sit and hope the guys who came for the inauguration will come for the second service, and then they get disappointed, and then they have 2 or 3 families hanging around them, and life becomes very tough. So tell us about how did it work out for you, that first initial church, and did you have any shortfall? Did you at one point begin to get discouraged? How did it all play out?
Well, the first thing we've got to learn is that God himself is a relational God. Mm-hmm. And the gospel itself is a relational message.
Okay.
And so what often happens is we think that if we start a worship service, the crowds are going to flock. Mm-hmm. That's a come strategy. Mm-hmm. What the Bible talks about is a go strategy.
Okay, wonderful. I like that. There is a come strategy and a go strategy.
Yes. That means we're trying to grow our church by attraction. Mm-hmm. So we're hoping we have good enough music. We're hoping we have a good enough sermon. Uh-huh. We're hoping we have good enough children's work. We're hoping we have good enough youth work that maybe people will come and stay. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, if I develop you as a friend, mm-hmm. and I love you, and I love you, and I say to you, one of the things that I do each Sunday is I believe God is an important part of my life. I'd like you to come with me as my guest. Mm-hmm. And you come, you hear the gospel, you've seen the gospel lived out in my life. You become a Christian and you stay in that church because you've already got a friend in the church that loves you. Mm-hmm. So we have found out, after interviewing more than 1 million people, mm-hmm. 95% of all people who become Christians do so as the direct result of a friend or a relative.
Friend or a relative. Oh, wow, wonderful.
95% of all the people who ever become Christians. Mm-hmm. And I've surveyed pastors, I've surveyed lay people, and the answer is the same in every country, in every denomination. That's how the gospel spreads. Now, if you look at the gospel records, mm-hmm. you find out that Jesus followed that strategy himself. Mm-hmm. When he healed somebody, he'd say, go and tell your friends what the Lord has done for you.
Okay.
That was Jesus' strategy. So what happens is we read the Great Commission to go into all the world and make disciples, and we disregard the very way that Jesus taught his disciples to go and make disciples.
Yes.
And we try and develop all these strategies with advertising and, big startups, and it doesn't work that way. If you look at the New Testament church, I'll give you two insights, and they're both from the book of Acts.
Yes.
Number one, you'll notice it said the number of people following Jesus increased daily. The number of disciples increased daily.
Okay.
When you get onto about chapter 5 of the book of Acts, it says the number of churches multiplied daily.
Okay. Churches multiplied.
The churches multiplied. Now, why did church? Now, if you remember what was going on, the church at that point was only meeting in homes. They were
Yes.
meeting in the homes, but then in a large gathering, they just went to the court of the Gentiles at the temple. But the church itself was meeting in homes. And what happens is people would invite their friends and neighbors and everything else to come into a home. And in that home, they would see Christianity lived out. People loving one another, caring for one another, praying for one another, sharing with one another. All these one another statements of Scripture, they were all done in this small group.
Yes.
And people were loved into the kingdom. And what happened, because those homes only held 10 or 15 people, when the groups got to 10 or 15 people, they started in another home, and
Right.
another home, and another home. And all of a sudden, the church exploded.
Yes.
By the time you reach the year 300,
Right.
the church had so penetrated society, and the gospel itself had reached the poor, the sick, the widows, the orphans, the outcasts of society, that by the time Constantine becomes emperor in the city after his name, Constantinople, now Istanbul at that point, he declared the empire Christian, not because he had become a Christian himself, but because the culture already was Christian. They
Right.
had saturated the culture with Christianity.
Yes.
And the first church that was built by Constantine in today Istanbul. You can see the church. It stands to this day. It's called the Hagia Sophia.
Okay. Yes.
And
yes.
the Hagia Sophia, when you go in that, the first church ever built in Christendom held over 10,000 people.
Wow. Wow.
And that's just in one city of Constantinople. And so what happened is the New Testament church grew primarily because it was a relational, life-changing religion.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
And in today's world, sometimes people say there's only two reasons people don't become Christians. Number one, they've never seen a Christian. Number two, they have.
Ah, my goodness. Yes, yes, yes. That's very profound. And we need to emphasize that point. Those of you that are following this, conversation, that the only reason why some people are not Christians is, one, they have never heard or they have never met a Christian. Number two, they have met a Christian, and that's why they are not a Christian. They didn't like what they saw.
Yes.
That is amazing.
So, you see, if I have you as my friend, and I talk to you about Jesus,
Yes.
you have to know that there's something different in me than there is in you. Otherwise, there's no reason for you to make a change.
Exactly.
And so when we as Christians are looking more and more like the people in the world, what happens is that we have less and less effect of
Yes.
the message we try to preach.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. Absolutely. Absolutely amazing. I really love this, and I think what is coming out of it, if you think from a strategy point of view, because most people are looking for formulas, you're saying that this relationship strategy where people, I love this statistic that 95% of people who join the church or become part of the church is because of a friend or a relative.
Correct.
I can say that is proven. Even in
It
our
is
church
proven,
here.
yes.
In our church here. Most of our people have come in through connection. Visitors come because they are coming to visit their relatives. And some of them, they just, as soon as they walk in, they give their life to Christ. And
That's
they become
correct.
members of the church.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Because what often happens is many Christians don't really feel comfortable taking people through a gospel presentation or something like that. But what they do is they've developed the relationship to the point that that friend they have is willing to come to church with them.
Mm-hmm.
And then the pastor himself gives the gospel message and they respond to it. But yet if you ask those people a month later, why did you become a Christian? They'll say, well, my friend brought me to church and I accepted Christ.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you know, you as pastor would like to get the credit for that, but you don't. I want to tell you a story about a pastor friend of mine. His name is Tom Mercer. He went to a church of about 120 people in the high desert community of Victorville, California. It's a community of about 30,000 people. It's a rural type community or small town type community. He did nothing in his church but build the church on that strategy of every Christian has 6 to 15 people in their sphere of influence that are far from God, and that God has planted them strategically in that world, and their responsibility beyond anything they do in the church is simply to be Christ to that group of people who are still far from God. 15 years later, his church is over 14,000 people.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
1 out of every 2 people in that community has come to faith in Christ through a relationship they had with a Christian that was already in the church. So 121 people, and not all of them took it seriously, as Tom says.
Yes.
But he said there was enough of them took it seriously, and he said, I modeled that myself. I built relationships with my neighbors and friends and the people at the stores I went to. I built a network of unsafe people that were friends. We invited them over to our house for dinner. I started building relationship with them. And he says, one by one, they started to come to know Christ. And then he says, the moment they came to know Christ, I asked them to make a list of all the people that were in their sphere of influence who were still far from God, that the message they received could change their lives too. And it's just grown like a wildfire. He's written a number of books on the subject, Your 8 to 15, Your World Delivered. He's got a number of books on that. But it's a proven strategy. And while as a church we need to have things that will grow Christians, Bible studies and prayer meetings and all of that,
Yes.
those are always secondary to the primary mission of the church.
I'm going to hold you there. I'm going to hold you there. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe you're following this conversation. You're hearing what my guest, Professor Dr. Robert or Bob, or a man that has a heart for the church, a man that has proven that yes, you can grow church, you can actually make a success, but you got to apply the basic principles. You know, go make disciples of all nations, and that means you start by reaching out, making friends. And he has shared with us that 95% of the people who ever come to church and receive Christ always say that they came in through a friend or a relative. So that's the key. That's the key. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we will talk about any other strategies, and I'm going to be asking him some of the other experiences he has had, and maybe some of the other problems that are associated with church and growing churches. And so don't go away. Keep it here. Keep it elevate. We are coming back to this conversation. Amen. All right.
ready for a divine encounter. East Africa, it's time to rise. From November 7th to 9th, 2024, Eternity Ministries invites you to the Ignition Conference East Africa, which will take place at Pan-Africa Christian University, located along Lumumba Drive in Roysambu, Nairobi. Sessions will run from 8 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. This is your moment to experience a Church of Warriors 2, a 3-day gathering of anointed teaching, healings, signs and wonders, impartation, and ignition. Get ready to be empowered. Join a lineup of seasoned leaders, including Pastor Wesley Ogude, Dr. Ferdinand Nweke, Dr. Kurt Olson, and Brother Mark Kolo, as they usher in the fresh wave of God's presence. It is a movement that will reignite your faith and equip you to be a part of God's end-time army. And here's the best part, it's absolutely free. Simply register now at www.eternityministriesorg/ICEA. Mark your calendar November 7th to 9th and prepare to experience the power of God like never before. The warriors are gathering. Will you be among them? See you there.
Welcome back. Thank you so much for those of you that are tuned in. I have seen your comments on the YouTube channel. I'll be sampling some of your comments as we go along. So welcome and thank you for joining us on this amazing conversation. We are talking about church growth, purpose, plan, strategy. And so before we went to the break, my guest Bob was telling us about really that key strategy, the key strategy of friends, relatives, bringing other people to church. 95% of the people who have ever been to church, when they were asked, they say they went to church because of that, because somebody was a friend to them or somebody was a relative. So that's the real key, and we need to apply that. But beyond that, Bob, as we dive back into this conversation, there is need for a systematic way of training pastors so that they can become effective as church leaders, and also the whole church growth movement. I know we may not have enough time to touch on that, but please. And then again, you are in the academy, seminary training pastors, training seminary students. So you've been a president of a Christian university. So I know there is a lot of materials, ideas, models, and strategies that you carry along. So tell us, what are the frameworks that maybe are the best frameworks that we can use to train pastors, or strategies that pastors can adopt quickly? Yes. During the break, you mentioned something, and I would like you to attend to it.
I start with one of the final lectures Donald McGavran gave before he passed in his 92nd year. Mm-hmm. And he said there needs to be a dramatic shift in theological education.
Okay.
And the shift, he said, was critical. Mm-hmm. Is he said pastors miss two great things. Mm-hmm. And that is, they don't come out with a great passion for souls. They haven't really learned about the heart of a God who loves to seek and find. It's not beating in their heart. Mm-hmm. And consequently, there is no urgency about anything they do related to the mission. Mm-hmm. He said the second thing, in theological education, we don't teach people how to grow a church.
Okay.
We learn about our eschatology, we learn about our theology, we learn about our bibliology, we learn about our ethics, we learn about psychology, we learn counseling, we learn all the things that teach us how to manage a church that exists they don't train us how to manage the church that could exist.
Right, right.
So we have a model of education that was built in the 16th century that actually had a population that was about 100% Christian, so they were training managers to look after it.
Okay.
Now we're in a culture where the majority of people are not Christians, so we're having to train missionaries to be pastors.
Okay.
And so what we did at our seminary is we required all of our students to take at least one course every quarter that had to do with the practology or the theology of mission, so that they could come out equipped to lead their church to grow. What I have observed in Kenya as I've been here, I've asked, now it's hundreds of pastors. I said, how many of you in the Bible college training you got any training about how to grow your church? The answer, if I could find 3 people on one hand, that would be all.
Okay, okay.
And those are mostly people who got some of their education in the States where some of the colleges are doing that. But by and large, Bible colleges here are not doing it. Last week with Apostle Isaac, I was actually doing a final course, and it would be the only course that the people in his school had that would be related to the mission.
Okay.
So I think one of the things we're doing is, if I was to take you to a model, if I was to draw a circle like this and put a line across the middle horizontally, and I put everything above the line as divine or of God, and everything underneath the line as natural or human. And then if I was to draw a vertical line down there, and I've now divided this into 4 quadrants.
Okay.
On the one side, you're looking at relationships. And there's 2 kinds of relationships. There's the relationships above the middle line, which are divine, and that has to do with the leader and his intimacy with God. The people that know their God will be strong and do exploits.
Okay.
Underneath that line, on the natural, there's human relationships.
Yes.
All of the relationships we have, the family relationships, the friend relationships. And what you find is pastors don't succeed sometimes because they don't know how to tell the truth. They get angry with people.
Right.
They're not honest. Because they've messed everything up over here in the relationship area.
Okay. Okay.
And what you find is that more leaders fail because of character than they do because of competence. On the top of the line again, we have seeing the power of God, or the manifestation of the power of God. So God not only needs to work in me, he needs to work through me.
Okay.
And so that's where we have the power of faith to change circumstance, the ability to cast out demons that Jesus talks about, and all of that stuff. On the bottom side, there is the natural and learned skills.
Yes.
Okay. Now, if you have, on the other side, if you have relationship with God and good relationships with people, and you know how to live out the power of God, but if you don't have any practical skills and talents, you're going to find yourself struggling because that section is weak.
Right.
And so what I've been doing in Kenya and many other countries of the world, I come in and I'm actually doing the remedial work to help increase a pastor's skills in how do you actually grow a church.
No, I love that. I love that. And I think that's a very profound, very simple model, but yes, very, very profound. And saying that, look, theological education has maximized on all the, the systematic theology we know, the Christologies, the missiology and everything else, so
yes.
You teach all the wonderful, amazing stuff, including what you're saying, counseling, psychology and all that. So how to manage a church, but we fail to teach this simple model of how to grow. That is on the relationship side, and on the competence side, both in terms of what you would call power, gifts, and then natural gift. And so a pastor must be complete within that circle.
That's correct. We naturally gravitate to that which we enjoy or are good at.
Yes.
And the problem is unless you have a balance in your leadership, it's very difficult to be effective.
Yes, yes, yes.
And theological education, I think, has not really understood well the culture and how to apply. For example, if you would talk about Christology, well, how does Christ fit into your culture? Remember, he said he was the way, the truth, and the life. We give the truth, but most people in our culture are looking for us to show them how Christ is the way and how he's the life. And we're trying to give them theological answers when they have life-oriented questions.
That's true.
And I was saying that's just like the disciples with Jesus when they asked Jesus, tell us about the end times and when you're coming back. They asked an eschatological question, and Christ gave them a soteriological answer. He says, go and preach the gospel, and then the end will come. You know, so sometimes in theological education, we're not answering the right questions.
That is true. That is absolutely true. That's coming from a president of a retired president of a theological, college. I mean, a serious, California State Christian University. And so really, and I think that's really a very serious conversation you're raising, men of God, because we have to realize that we have to bring our training and our preparation of leaders and church leaders in particular. We must make sure that we are training the whole person.
That's correct.
So that the pastor becomes part of the local community of leaders and change and transformational leaders and people who can actually solve practical problems in society.
Yes, and that's what David, when you look at the story of David and his mighty men, and it said they knew their God and they knew their people.
Right.
They knew both. They knew their culture. They knew that they were people who were tied into the heart of God, but they were also tied into the needs of people. And at that point, when you as a leader get detached from that, when I became a pastor, one of the things I found is there was a tremendous amount of pressure of entropy. That is, it turns the leader in, turns the church in. There's that pressure of things. And I found myself as a pastor saying, I can't live life true to God if I don't have unsaved friends and relatives that I'm trying to reach with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Because I can stand up in the pulpit every Sunday and say, hey folks, invite your friends to come to church with you. If they never see anyone in church that I've invited, they don't take me seriously. Because the people of God are faithfully obedient to what we do, not obedient to what we say.
Oh, wow. 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 That is so amazing indeed. That is so amazing. Ladies and gentlemen, as you follow this conversation, we are having an amazing conversation here. Let me just look at some of the comments that are coming in here. I see Pastor Karen already enjoying the show. Church in midlife crisis. I think that is something I want us to return to. You mentioned it, and I think I would have missed that. So our church mission must be aligned to the mission of Jesus. Go ye. And I think the other thing you mentioned is the idea of sometimes we have this model of church growth or a come to church model instead of a go ye model.
Yes.
And that's very, very profound. Then the reason why people in society don't come to Jesus is because they have never met a Christian, and this is a summary. They have met a Christian who fell short. Wonderful. you mentioned this. Let me actually, midlife crisis, that midlife crisis you're talking about,
Well-
the cycles of church growth. Yes, talk
Yes.
about that.
There are actually 5 cycles, but I want to give you an overview. When we had gathered data for over 3,000 churches, and we had looked at their decadal growth rates,
Okay.
what we observed is that churches that were under 20 years of age, from 0 to 15, 18 years of age, by and large, those churches grew. We noted that the majority of churches that were from, say, 20 to 35 to 40, the majority of them were plateaued. And the majority of churches over 40 years of old were declining. So we saw a life cycle.
Okay.
And what we noticed is that 85% of churches were either plateaued or declining. And so when we asked the church, found out the age of the churches, we found out that this 85%, the majority, were in this 15 to 18 year and older. So we saw a cycle. And that life cycle I wrote up in the article is your church in a midlife crisis. Or have you been growing for a while and now all of a sudden you've stalled and you're saying, what's church all about now? And so what happened is myself, I wrote up the article, and a lot of other people who were starting to study the discipline started taking it and playing around with it. By the time we got to 1984, the life cycle that I had written was well known, it had been described well, and a man by the name of Robert Dale wrote a book, To Dream Again. And what he did is he took the idea of the life cycle and he said, that's the way it happens on a dream. You start with a dream, you set goals to see that dream accomplished, and then all of a sudden you do the work, and then all of a sudden you've got nostalgia where you look back at what you used to do, and the dream dies.
Right.
Because you've already got there.
Yes.
So I started to say, okay, if you're going to revitalize a church, it needs to get a new dream. But then a man by the name of Joel Barker, a secular man,
Yeah.
wrote a book called The Business of Paradigms.
Okay.
And he said paradigms have a cycle. And paradigms, if you say to me, this is how we do it around here,
Yeah.
you're giving me the paradigm. This
Okay.
is the way we do things.
Yes.
It's the rules by which we do business.
Right.
So paradigms have this cycle, and many churches are doing things right for what they used to be able to get a result from. But the paradigm is no longer meeting the needs. So for example, if the paradigm that a church has got people all over the age of 50, and you keep wondering why there are no young people coming to your church, the problem is you haven't asked the question, what would our church have to look like to reach young people? Because you see, you've already answered the question, this is how our church looks to attract people over the age of 50. That's that paradigm. You need a new paradigm.
Yeah, new dream, new paradigm.
New paradigm. Then there were 2 others, and both I developed. One was values. A value is a belief that we have learned how to practice.
Okay.
So if I say to you, I believe in generosity, but if I don't give anything, am I generous?
No.
So my belief and my value are different.
Okay.
But if my belief is I believe in generosity and I give generously, then my belief has become a value.
Okay.
So I say to churches, and I could say it to your congregation or anything, I'd say, how many of you believe that lost people matter to God?
Okay.
I'll guarantee everybody would put up their hand.
Yes.
Why? Because they know that's the Bible.
Yes.
Then I would ask them a different question. Tell me about the last time you talked to an unchurched person about the love of Jesus.
Okay.
You see, they haven't turned their belief into value.
Okay. Okay.
And so what we find is the difference between growing churches and non-growing churches is what they do is they have learned how to take their belief and find attached behavior to it.
Okay.
So that people are living out their faith.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
what gives Christianity its thing. So we find that values over time. For example, when I first became a pastor, I had a real passion for souls, and I watched after a number of years in the church, I was starting to lose that passion. The value was eroding.
Okay, okay.
And so we have to, as pastors, recognize that one of the things we have to do is keep reinforcing in our own life behavior and in our teaching to our congregation and in the work we do with our leaders. We have to keep going on with the right things. Then the final one was the life cycle of the leader, where a leader starts with a dream like you talked about earlier, and he wants to start a church and he sets goals. Then all of a sudden he works hard and he gets some results. Then after a while he hits some hard times and he gets a little bit discouraged, and all of a sudden the leader now is down on the downside of the life cycle. So now we've got 5 different things. If the leader is stuck, the church is stuck.
Right.
If the values are eroded, the church is stuck.
Right.
If you're using the wrong paradigm, the church is stuck.
Okay.
If you don't have a dream, the church is stuck.
Yes.
So what I started to do was take that life cycle of churches and say, I can, with just an ordinary graph of looking at your attendance past and in the present, and put it on a graph, I can put you at a point where you are. And if the church is either plateaued or declining, I can look at one of those 4 things. Is there no compelling vision to compel the pilgrimage, a dream? Are they doing things that they used to do 20 years ago and they're irrelevant? The paradigm is bad? Do they have values that are really being practiced, lived out, worked out? And is the leader still vital in his relationship with God? Is he still loving lost people? Is he still pushing towards the prize of the mark of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus?
Yes. That 4 dimension of analysis, so those 4 areas of analysis can tell you can map on those life cycles.
Yes, we can map it out precisely. And what I was able to do with pulling all that together, what I was able to do is turn the life cycle from descriptive to prescriptive.
Okay. Absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. Professor Bob, I'm in the academy as well. So I'm familiar with this, when somebody has to really think through something and lay it out, and then now, write a paper or a book and then now you teach students. I love the way those ideas work out, because when you develop a good model of analysis, and even, because it's a model for introspection, you're telling pastors, look, where is your church? On these 4 dimensions. And you help pastors to look around and they actually realize, we're doing so badly.
Yes, and what it forces the pastor to do is look at themselves.
Yes.
Because what we find in probably the majority of the churches, it appears to us that that the pastor is so stuck in his ways and model of doing things that unless the church gets a new leader or the leader dramatically changes, this church is not moving.
I love that. And my good men of God, I tell you, this is amazing. We are talking about church growth here, and this is. I just want to see some of the comments coming in here, and all right. So Facebook page, you're very, very quiet, but I can see you're following this conversation. So amazing. You're going to be telling us what you're learning, and we've burned quite a bit of time. We have very little time left. I love the idea of the life cycle. That model is so profound. Have you written a book about that? Is that part of the book that you wrote?
What I'm doing right now is I'm writing what is called a church growth reader.
Okay.
What we're finding is that leaders today are not reading long books.
Okay.
They tend to read articles or synopsis. They tend to look at internet articles and so on. And so what I'm doing is I'm putting together, hope to have it finished by March or April.
Yeah.
I am taking articles on critical issues that I've written, on the life cycle, on how the church grows, on that principle of the 95%. I've written an article on small groups. I've written an article on authority and how it plays out in the church. I've written a special article on the small church. I've written an article on how you shift paradigms in a church. I've written one on small groups. But there's chapters, and what you're going to get is 12 to 14 pages in each chapter that basically are going to outline the critical elements in this subject.
Okay.
If you really feel you need to grow deeper, there are others who have written books on the whole subject.
Okay.
So my job is I've been the researcher and pulled that out, and I've been what Peter Wagner called a first generation researcher. I've got new research that I just completed that I presented at this conference, and it's I found that 95% of pastors who've been in their church 20 years, the church is plateaued or declining.
Okay.
95. So I said, what would the 5% that are still growing after 20 years look like? And so I did a major study of pastors who've been in their church more than 20 years, and the church continued to grow and grow by conversion. And I found out what was the pattern of their life. And the interesting thing is every one of those characteristics was a learnable trait.
Okay.
So if you could train pastors in those factors before they even started, and if they could keep the pattern of doing the simple things. So for example, these pastors said, I've had to fight to keep relationships with unchurched people as a priority in my life. And he says, I now put every Thursday afternoon, and I'm going to spend time with lost people every Thursday afternoon. They put it in their calendar because it's that important to them. Because they want to be a model to their congregation that I'm not so busy in church that I can't take time for people who are lost.
Wow. Amazing insights here. My guest here, Bob or Professor Robert Orr. He's an amazing man of God, very practical ideas. He's put together a lot of work. He's been studying the church and how churches grow and the small churches. And I'm sure you're getting a lot of insights here. And we're just about to wrap up this, man of God. And maybe looking at the churches in Kenya, is there something special you have observed about the church in Kenya? Because where there is a claim that the church is growing very rapidly in Africa, do you see us maybe also get into that trap of stagnation, like what is happening in the West in general?
Yes, I'm observing from my first visit in Kenya, that was about probably 15 years ago, 16 years ago. I'm observing that there are less young people in church today than there were 15 years ago.
Okay.
So I'm noticing that there is if you look at the church generationally, I'm seeing from the builder generation, people of my, older than me, I'm the first year of the baby boom.
Yes.
But from my generation down, it appears that what I'm seeing in Kenya is what I'm seeing in the States, that as you drop generations, by the time you get down to the millennial generation, it's the least churched, and the oldest generation is the most churched. And we're starting to see a decreasing percentage of people who are Christians as we succeed in generations. And I don't think it's because Christianity is not relevant to each generation. I think it's because we as a church are not deliberately doing the two things that Jesus told us to do.
Right.
Spread the gospel to our own generation and pass the faith on to the next.
Wonderful. That needs to be said very clearly. Spread the gospel to our generation and pass the gospel to the next generation.
Generation.
And so I wish I could have you here another 1 hour so that then we can talk about transmission. And I think that for me is a very, very serious issue, because I know even cultures, even successful democracies like the American democracy,
Yes.
if they don't pass democratic values to the next generation, there's going to be, the civilization will collapse. And, you know.
Yes. Well, let me give you one simple thing that every pastor can do that will help him in his church. Every
Okay.
Sunday morning, when you preach, you need to show people how to take the step to become a Christian. And so one of the things that I learned is every Sunday when I preach, I say to people, if this message makes sense in your life and you don't really understand why your life is not going the way you'd really like it to do, I want to tell you that Jesus does have an answer. And I want to tell you, becoming a follower of Jesus is as simple as A, B, C. A, if you'll admit you can't do it on your own, that you've fallen short, if you believe that you're not a perfect person, A, admit it. B, if you believe that Jesus Christ is the only solution that God has ever offered for our condition. And C, if you'll commit your life to Him, if you make that choice, He'll make the change. Now, if you do that every Sunday in your church, every Sunday, everybody in your church is going to learn very intuitively. If I'm talking to an unsaved person and they ever ask me about my faith, I can simply say, it's as simple as ABC.
Wonderful, wonderful.
You see, so what you do as a pastor, sometimes you don't think you've got as many unsaved people there as you think, and what you end up doing is you end up skipping an invitation to the lost. I give the invitation to the lost for two reasons. One is for the lost, and the other is to train my people how to share their faith.
Absolutely. We got to end this conversation. Absolutely amazing. My guest here, Professor Robert all the way from America, all the way from California. He was the president, just the former president of California State Christian University, and he's done a lot of work. He's trained a lot of students. He's trained a lot of pastors, and he's so passionate. I wish we had more time for him to share all the wonderful ideas and the lessons he has learned over the very many years he has lived. I am so blessed that you came to today's show, and unfortunately we got to end it there, but maybe you can just send greetings to your family and tell them to keep watching Elevate TV from Kenya.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Godfrey.
Yes.
I am honored to be on your program, and I bless you and I bless your church, and to all my friends and family, God bless you. It's been a joy to be in Kenya. And my only prayer is that God will open up doors for me to come back and spend more time here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. We've come to the end of this conversation, this show, and I'm so blessed. I'm so glad that you stayed tuned in, and may the Lord bless you and enrich you. And those of you who've been watching on Facebook and YouTube, God bless you so much. Keep it Elevate and keep following this program. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure that the bell button is activated so that every time we go live, you're reminded. I've been your host, Godfrey Gichuki. This is the Gigi Report. I'm so blessed. God bless you. We'll see you another day. Keep it Elevate. Same time, same channel. Bye for now.